I'm Grace Miller, 31 years old, the daughter they trained themselves not to see. In the Miller house, Amanda has always been the sun, and I've been the shadow that proved her shine. Father's pride, mother's dream, Amanda's endless stage, while my chair at the table never felt like it belonged. I used to think being ignored was easier than being mocked, but then came the night Amanda leaned across her glass of wine, lips curling with that perfect smile, and said sweetly, "Maybe one day you'll have a real career worth talking about." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it cut deep enough to leave a scar. Ever been told you don't matter in your own family? Hit like if you've ever had your worth dismissed, and comment if you know what it feels like to be erased from your own story. For me, it began at that dinner table, candles flickering, everyone celebrating Amanda's future while I sat in silence, holding back the storm that would one day break. The candles flickered across the polished mahogany table, sending a warm glow through the Miller residence in Westchester. From the outside, the house looked like a portrait of stability red brick, trimmed hedges, tasteful chandeliers. Inside, the warmth was a performance. I had sat at this table my entire life, but it always felt like I was visiting someone else's home, never truly mine. Amanda launched into her latest story before I had even set my napkin on my lap. She thrived on an audience, and she had the perfect stage here. Her ring caught the light as she waved her hand, flaunting it like a crown jewel. Daniel just finalized the guest list today. Can you believe it? 400 names, and that's just the first draft. Everyone who matters will be there. Father's laugh rumbled low, indulgent. That's my girl, always the center of attention. Mother leaned forward, eyes bright. You'll be the most beautiful bride, Amanda, just like we dreamed when you were little. Their words washed over me, familiar as the china pattern beneath my fingertips. I had heard versions of them for years, each affirmation another reminder of the hierarchy that was never questioned. Amanda adored, Grace dismissed. I cleared my throat, trying to sound casual. The Journal published my research piece this week. Father cut me off with a flick of his hand, not even meeting my eyes. That's fine, Grace. But Amanda, tell us again about the dress fittings. Evelyn, did you see the sketches? The silence after his dismissal stung sharper than the words themselves. Amanda's lips curled into the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. Maybe one day you'll get a real career worth talking about, she said sweetly, her tone dipped in venom. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. It threaded through my skin, stitching the old wounds deeper. I lowered my gaze to the wine glass in my hand, its surface trembling slightly with the pressure of my grip. My face remained still, a mask I had perfected through years of being the invisible daughter, the afterthought. But behind the mask, fury coiled tight, pressing against my ribs. And then, unbidden, a memory slid across my mind like an old scar opening. Amanda at 16, standing on the auditorium stage, clutching her debate trophy while the spotlight crowned her. I was 15, watching from the back row, heart pounding with a pride I didn't even share out loud. When the ceremony ended, I approached our parents, clutching a certificate of recognition for a science fair. Father barely glanced at it, ushering us instead toward Amanda's celebration dinner. That night, my certificate ended up folded in my backpack, forgotten. Amanda's trophy had its own shelf. The years between then and now felt like echoes of that moment. Tonight was no different, Amanda glittering, me dissolving into the background. I forced myself to breathe evenly, raising the glass to my lips with deliberate calm. The clink of crystal disguised the tightness in my jaw. Then my phone buzzed against the tablecloth. I glanced down, grateful for the distraction, but the screen froze me where I sat. The message was encrypted, the sender unmistakable. Director Hayes. 3 words. Need you at HQ. Urgent. Only within the sealed walls of the task force room did Grace exist as someone essential. The air inside the Manhattan Interpol Financial Crimes Unit was always cold, scrubbed clean by the hum of ventilation systems. Fluorescent lights flattened everything into shades of gray. No windows, no distractions, no outside world, just walls lined with screens, maps, and cables. The kind of place where identity was stripped down to credentials and skill. Here, I wasn't the overlooked daughter of the Miller family. Here, I was an analyst whose word could redirect entire investigations. The sting from last month's dinner still clung to me, but it transformed in this room. At home, Amanda's words had made me small. Here, those same memories carved me into someone sharper, someone impossible to ignore. Director Hayes leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. his hawk-like eyes narrowing at the projection on the screen. Jason Reed sat across from me, tapping his pen against a yellow legal pad, a rhythm that betrayed both restlessness and doubt. He was younger, quick with numbers, but still untested in battles where politics tangled with justice. I tapped the keyboard, and columns of figures spread across the digital board. The Kane family is laundering through what they're calling wedding gifts, I said, my voice steady. Shell companies funnel money disguised as guest contributions. On the surface, it looks like celebration. Underneath, it's wire transfers masked as tradition. Jason tilted his head, skeptical. That's a stretch, Grace. People give gifts all the time. Cash, checks, even property. Isn't it possible you're connecting dots that aren't there, especially with Amanda involved? His words landed with the familiar sting, but not because they surprised me. I had expected them. Family was my blind spot to anyone watching, a weak seam ready to be tugged open. I clasped my hands together and stared directly at him. It's not speculation. The flow of funds matches patterns we've tracked for years. These aren't wedding guests. They're international brokers moving dirty money. Hayes exhaled sharply, shifting forward in his chair. Jason has a point. If you let family cloud your judgment, you're off this case. I won't jeopardize Interpol's credibility on personal grudges. The accusation cut close, but I had been carving my armor for this moment. I straightened, letting the silence hang heavy until both men fixed on me. Then I spoke, cold and deliberate, each word balanced like a blade. This isn't personal. This is justice. Hayes studied me for a long beat, his face unreadable. Jason leaned back, pen stilling, as if reassessing the person he thought he had pegged so easily. I turned back to the screen and expanded the feed. Numbers flickered, accounts cross-linked, and then one detail glared back at me, undeniable. An account flagged in red, under the Kane portfolio, time-stamped with precision. My pulse quickened. The account had been opened on the exact same date Amanda's wedding deposit cleared. The wedding invitation glistened like a trophy yet to Grace. It was a war summons. It had arrived that afternoon, slipped under my apartment door in a glossy envelope heavy with gold embossing. I hadn't touched it for hours, letting it rest on the counter like an unwelcome relic, until the night grew quiet enough that my own thoughts became deafening. I tore it open under the sterile light of my desk lamp. The card shimmered, all gilded flourishes and expensive paper, announcing the union of Amanda Miller and Daniel Kane. My eyes caught on Amanda's handwriting scrawled at the bottom, curled, confident letters spelling out a casual note. Don't be late this time. The insult from dinner came rushing back, her voice dripping with mockery. It was never just words with Amanda. It was always performance, always theater at my expense. The invitation wasn't a gesture of inclusion. It was a proclamation of dominance, a reminder of where she believed I belonged on the sidelines, watching her shine. I clenched the card, tracing the gold foil letters with my thumb until the edges bent. To Amanda, this was celebration. To me, it was challenge. A knock jolted me. I slid the card beneath a stack of files before opening the door. Jason Reed leaned against the frame, jacket wrinkled, tie loosened, eyes carrying the exhaustion of someone who hadn't left the office in days. "You don't answer calls after midnight?" he asked, stepping inside without waiting. "I answer for emergencies," I said flatly, moving toward my desk. "Is this one?" Jason tossed a folder onto the surface, papers spilling slightly. We traced the Kane transfers. The so-called gifts are landing in offshore accounts. Cayman, Zurich, even Singapore. Every guest is part of the laundering cycle. I skimmed the figures, the pattern leaping at me instantly. It was elegant in its audacity. Money in, money out, all draped in the disguise of love and family. My stomach tightened. "They're using the wedding as a pipeline," I murmured. Jason crossed his arms, watching me. "You really think you can use this? It's your sister's life you're tying to this case." I looked at him, letting the weight of his doubt settle only long enough to harden my resolve. "You don't understand," I said quietly. "The wedding isn't just a celebration, it's the stage. Every player will be their Kanes, their brokers, their shell fronts. If they think they've built a golden monument for Amanda, they're wrong. It's a golden trap." Jason shifted uneasily, as though the line between colleague and confidant was thinning. His skepticism hadn't faded, but I saw something else flicker in his gaze, a reluctant recognition that I wasn't bluffing. I picked up the invitation again, staring at Amanda's handwriting until the paper blurred. The echo of her smug smile filled my mind, sharper than any insult. I whispered into the room, the words more vow than statement. "I'll be there, Amanda, but not as a guest." The room was silent except for the hum of my computer. Then the monitor flickered, notifications streaming across the screen. My breath caught as one line sharpened into focus. Richard Kane himself had just logged into a private Cayman account. Behind Daniel Kane's polished smile flickered the eyes of a predator. He stood before a wall of glass in the Kane Group headquarters, Manhattan's skyline blazing behind him like a crown of steel and light. His reflection merged with the glittering towers outside, as though the city itself had bowed to him. Daniel tugged at his cufflinks, admiring the diamond studs that caught the office light, before he turned and spread his arms as though presenting a throne room. "This wedding," he declared, voice smooth as lacquer, "isn't just a celebration. It's a power display. Every guest is a buyer, every toast a transaction, every gift a channel." His grin widened, shark-like. "By the end of the night, Amanda will be draped in jewels, and I'll be sitting atop a mountain of clean capital." From the far end of the room, Richard Kane's heavier footsteps approached. Older, broader, and far less polished than his son, he exuded menace without effort. His salt-and-pepper hair was slicked back, but his eyes were harder than marble, cold and watchful. Where Daniel glowed with charm, Richard radiated danger. "You sound confident," Richard said, his gravelly tone carrying the weight of decades of darker dealings. "Too confident." He set a file on the polished oak table, its pages bristling with coded transfers and frozen accounts. "Interpol is circling. They've already seized 2 of our brokers in Zurich. Investigators will smell the blood. You can't afford to treat this like a stage show." Daniel laughed, dismissive, brushing invisible lint from his tailored lapel. "Interpol? Please. They're chasing shadows, and our little family asset is a perfect shield." He walked toward the table, plucked up one of the documents, and tossed it back with disdain. "Who'd ever suspect the invisible sister? Her own family doesn't. To them, she's nothing Amanda's shadow. She'll never be anything more." Richard's jaw flexed. He glanced toward the skyline again, the lights flickering like silent warnings. "The underestimation is always the most dangerous," he muttered, his voice dropping into something almost prophetic. "It's the one mistake predators repeat, right before their prey turns." Daniel smirked, unbothered, confident in the gilded fortress he believed unshakable. He gestured to the security guards outside the glass door, their expressions blank, their postures rigid. "We're untouchable, Father. By the time anyone dares lift a finger, the money will have crossed oceans. We'll be in their pockets, their courts, their governments." Richard didn't answer. He lingered in silence, his shadow stretching long against the glass, as though the city itself bent around his presence. Neither of them noticed the innocuous object tucked beneath the central table, a nondescript device no larger than a thumb drive. Its light blinked silently, capturing every word, every arrogant inflection, every warning. Unbeknownst to them, Grace's hidden device recorded every word. Beneath layers of white lace, Amanda still finds room for a blade of mockery. The boutique sparkled like a jewel box, every chandelier dripping with crystals, every surface lined in ivory and champagne satin. Bridesmaids fluttered about with glasses of sparkling rosé, their laughter chiming like silver bells. The staff spoke in hushed, reverent tones, treating Amanda like royalty as they unveiled gown after gown. She soaked it in, stretching her arms out as if she were queen of the Upper East Side, spinning slowly before the gilded mirrors. "Exquisite," Evelyn Miller breathed, clasping her hands together. Her eyes brimmed with tears of admiration. "Amanda, you look divine. Daniel won't know what hit him." Amanda tilted her chin, watching herself in the mirror. "Of course," she said airily, "it's not just about him. It's about everyone else knowing they can't compete." Grace stood a step behind, carefully gathering the trailing fabric of a rejected gown, folding it over an arm without being asked. No one thanked her. No one even noticed her. The bridesmaids brushed past as though she were staff, murmuring compliments only to Amanda, adjusting veils, fluffing skirts, kissing her cheek. Grace's presence was as invisible here as it had been at the family table. Amanda glanced sideways, eyes narrowing. "Careful with that lace, Grace. It's worth more than your entire salary." The room chuckled softly, feeding on the cruelty disguised as jest. I kept my face unreadable, my hands steady as I placed the gown back on its hanger. Amanda's barbs had long ago lost their sting, but the sharpness lingered like phantom pain. She turned back to the mirror, striking poses while Evelyn dabbed her eyes again. "Maybe you should be grateful you're even invited," Amanda said suddenly, her voice light, but aimed directly at me. "After all, this isn't really your world, is it? You should enjoy the crumbs while you can." The room fell into complicit silence for a heartbeat, then resumed its chatter as though nothing had been said. I stood quietly, fingers resting on the polished wood of the boutique counter. My gaze traveled across the room, taking in every detail: the layout of the changing rooms, the emergency exits, the positions of cameras disguised as ornaments. To Amanda, this was a stage for her vanity. To me, it was reconnaissance. Every step she took, every veil she adjusted, I was already memorizing angles, reflections, vulnerabilities. Amanda twirled in a gown of layered lace and hand-stitched pearls. The mirror scattered her image into endless versions of herself, glowing, triumphant, untouchable. I stared at her reflection until my own pale figure came into focus behind hers, a shadow unnoticed. In my mind, I whispered to her reflection, each word sinking like iron into my chest. "Beautiful. But this dress will be stained with chaos." The thought steadied me. It was no longer hurt I carried, but calculation. No longer the overlooked sister, but the quiet strategist. A vibration broke the air. I slipped a hand into my coat pocket and withdrew my phone, shielding the screen from curious eyes. A single line glowed across the encrypted message from Director Hayes: "Operation Trojan Bride, authorized." Every line on the wedding hall blueprint looked less like decoration and more like a battlefield map. The secure operations room hummed with the low thrum of servers, the glow of multiple screens casting cold light across the metal table. The blueprint of the Plaza Hotel sprawled digitally across the central display, its elegant ballrooms, gilded staircases, and bridal suite now rendered in grids and coordinates. To anyone else, it was a celebration venue. To me, it was terrain to be conquered. I tapped a sequence, overlaying surveillance grids across the floor plan. Blue arcs represented existing hotel cameras, while red symbols highlighted blind spots that required coverage. Tiny dots pulsed where microphones would be placed, each positioned to capture whispers over champagne or threats disguised as wedding toasts. My fingers hovered over the digital surface like a conductor arranging an orchestra of precision. Jason leaned against the table, arms crossed, eyes skeptical. "You've turned a wedding into a military operation. Tell me this isn't personal." I didn't look up. "Everything is personal when you've been underestimated your whole life." He shook his head, his voice tight. "Grace, you're not invisible here. You're leading this. If you're wrong, if emotion is clouding your vision, Hayes will pull you out, and maybe he should." Hayes sat at the head of the table, his lined face unreadable. The man had seen operations collapse under the weight of personal vendettas before, and I knew he was evaluating me for the same weakness. "Jason isn't wrong," he said finally. "You're walking into a hall full of sharks. They don't forgive mistakes, and they love family fractures. The Canes will exploit you if they sense the smallest hesitation." The room quieted, the hum of the servers growing louder in the silence. My chest rose and fell once, steady. Then I lifted my eyes to meet his. "I've waited my entire life for this clarity." The words hung between us like a steel blade, sharp, immovable. Hayes didn't reply immediately, but I caught the faintest shift in his expression. Not approval, not doubt, recognition. I leaned closer to the blueprint. "Amanda believes this wedding is her coronation. Daniel sees it as a power display. Richard treats it like a fortress. None of them realize it's their cage." My finger traced across the glowing image, marking the ballroom entrances, the staff-only corridors, the gilded elevators that would ferry Amanda to her suite. Jason muttered, "You sound like you've rehearsed this speech." "Not a speech," I corrected softly. "A strategy. Every humiliation, every dismissal, this is where it converges." The agents nearby exchanged looks, some uncertain, others grimly impressed. One of them, a technician, pointed at the corner of the map. "Director, look at this. Blind spot right outside the bridal suite. Hotel's cameras don't cover it." A square glowed faintly, an absence in the web of surveillance. My pulse quickened. That space, left unguarded by luxury design, was no accident in this context. It was a perfect pocket. Jason leaned in. "That's where they'll talk. Away from guests, away from spectacle. You think Richard will risk exposing himself in public? No. He'll whisper where no camera sees. My breath steadied as I stared at that square of darkness. A place where Amanda's veil of arrogance and the Kane's secrets would merge. A pocket of silence that would either be my downfall or my victory. The cliffhanger hung in the blue glow, undeniable. On the digital map, a blind spot emerged right next to the bridal suite, likely where the Kanes would whisper. Thomas Miller thought his debts were buried, but debts to Richard Kane always crawled back to the surface. The office smelled of old wood polish and stale air, the blinds drawn tight as though the sunlight itself might expose him. Stacks of unpaid invoices leaned precariously on the desk, paper yellowing at the edges, each one a reminder of the business that had once been his pride. He sat hunched, sleeves rolled, hair damp with sweat though the October chill clung outside the window. The knock came low, deliberate, and when the door opened, Richard Kane filled the space like a shadow swallowing light. Thomas forced himself up, hand outstretched. "Richard, I never forgot what you did for me. When the bank was circling, when the creditors were calling, you stepped in. I owe you everything." His voice cracked at the end, and it sounded less like gratitude, more like surrender. Richard's lips curved into something that pretended to be a smile but had no warmth. He stepped closer, examining the cluttered office like it was a crime scene. "You're right. You do owe me. And debts, Thomas, have a way of being collected. You see, I don't forget either." Thomas swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing. "I've been paying. Every cent you asked, every adjustment you made I've followed." Richard leaned his hands on the desk, his diamond cufflinks catching what little light the lamp gave. "This isn't about money anymore. That little business of yours was pocket change. What I wanted, what I planned was leverage. Your daughter's wedding is my leverage. Amanda marrying Daniel secures more than family pride. It secures obedience." The words cut sharper than any bill collector ever had. Thomas's fingers twitched over a ledger, as though hiding behind numbers could save him. "She loves him," he said weakly. "A reflex defense." Richard chuckled, low and cruel. "Love? Don't insult me. Amanda's infatuation is convenient, but irrelevant. What matters is binding your family to mine. A debt tied with silk ribbons and wedding vows. Once she's his wife, your family belongs to me." The silence afterward stretched, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Thomas's knees nearly buckled beneath the weight of the truth he had always known, but never let himself say aloud. His phone buzzed on the desk. He fumbled it open, Evelyn's voice sharp, rushed. "Don't let Grace interfere, Thomas. This is Amanda's moment. Don't let her ruin it." She didn't ask how he was or if the meeting was safe. Her focus was on maintaining the fragile facade, keeping the favored daughter's crown intact. He murmured something in return, voice flat, eyes still locked on Richard. Richard leaned back, straightening his tie with practiced elegance. "You understand now. Silence your second daughter if you must, but the deal is sealed. Remember, Thomas, your survival depends on mine." When the door closed behind him, Thomas collapsed into his chair. His hands trembled as he rubbed his face, but the shaking never stopped. The office seemed to shrink, the debts on his desk multiplying like ghosts. Hours later, when he thought he was alone, Grace stepped quietly into the dimness. She had grown accustomed to moving through shadows, accustomed to being unseen. On the edge of his desk lay a folder Richard had left behind, its corner jutting like a careless taunt. She slid it open, eyes narrowing as she skimmed the contract. Numbers bled into signatures, clauses dressed in legal jargon, but the meaning was clear. Her parents hadn't just ignored her, they had willingly sold Amanda into the Kane's grip. Her throat tightened. Betrayal wasn't just Amanda's sneers or Daniel's arrogance, it was written in her father's trembling signature, in her mother's voice, dismissing her as an obstacle. The wound cut deeper than she had expected, twisting hot and cold all at once. She pressed her palm flat against the paper, steadying herself as the words branded her memory. The silence in that room wasn't empty anymore. It was roaring with the truth. Later, when she left, she carried no folder, no copies, just knowledge. And knowledge was always sharper than any blade. The cliffhanger struck with brutal clarity. Grace had found a copy of the contract, realizing her parents knowingly sold Amanda to the Kanes. In a city of masks, Grace wasn't sure if Jason Reed was the only face she could trust, or the first to betray her. The Midtown Cafe smelled of burnt espresso and cinnamon scones, the kind of warmth that promised comfort but delivered only noise and distraction. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the yellow lights of traffic outside. Grace slid into the booth at the far corner, where shadows softened the edges of everything. Jason was already there, hands wrapped around a coffee cup he hadn't touched, eyes flicking to the door like he expected more than caffeine. He didn't waste time. "There's a leak in the task force," he said, voice low but sharp enough to pierce through the chatter around them. "Someone's feeding the Canes information. They know pieces of our operation they shouldn't." Her chest tightened. The task force was small, insulated, and meticulously vetted, or so Hayes claimed. "You're saying someone's selling us out," she murmured, keeping her tone flat. Jason's gaze met hers, steady but tired. "I'm saying be careful who you trust." Grace stared at him, the suspicion already coiling. He had been too quick, too convenient with intel. He had access to data that even senior agents didn't. And now here he was, delivering warnings instead of proof. "Funny," she said, fingers tapping once against her cup. "You're the only one with access to certain files, the same files the Canes seem to know about." His jaw tightened, a flicker of offense sparking in his eyes. He leaned closer across the table. "If I were the leak, do you think I'd be telling you this? Do you think I'd risk this meeting?" Grace didn't answer. She watched him, the hum of the cafe dimming in her ears as she weighed every twitch, every inflection. Jason's mask, if it was one, was polished. Too polished. He reached into his jacket and placed a small USB drive on the table. The silver casing caught the dim light, an object that felt heavier than its size should allow. "I traced it," he said quietly. "The leak isn't from me. It's connected to someone on the Kane wedding guest list. High level. If you plug this in, you'll see." Grace didn't touch it at first. "Why hand this to me here, and not Hayes?" "Because I don't know if Hayes is compromised too," Jason shot back. "And because you're the only one with more to lose than me if this goes wrong. That makes you dangerous enough to trust." Her laugh was sharp, humorless. She leaned forward, close enough that her words could cut without anyone else hearing. "If you're lying, you're dead to me." Jason didn't flinch, though his grip on the coffee cup tightened until his knuckles whitened. Later, in the silence of her apartment, she slid the USB into her encrypted drive. The screen flickered, files opening with a deliberate slowness, as though dragging her toward revelation. Names scrolled: politicians, financiers, socialites, all polished masks that would fill the Kane wedding hall. And then one name froze her pulse: a sitting U.S. senator, slated to attend Amanda's wedding. The cliffhanger came with a jolt of inevitability. Grace now knew the Kane's reach extended into government itself. Amanda's dress sparkled in the hotel suite, oblivious that outside, a storm was sharpening its knives. The plaza suite was all crystal chandeliers and velvet drapes, but to Grace it felt more like a stage where the heroine had been miscast. Amanda twirled before the three-paneled mirror, her gown catching the golden light like a net made of diamonds. Every bead, every shimmer, was another weapon in her arsenal of vanity. Bridesmaids clapped politely. Evelyn dabbed at her eyes, and Amanda's laughter rang too sharp, too rehearsed. Grace stood near the window, watching the dark sky settle over Fifth Avenue. But Amanda's voice was impossible to ignore. "Try not to embarrass me tomorrow, Grace," Amanda sneered, smoothing a strand of hair in the mirror. "The last thing this city needs is a reminder you exist." The remark was delivered with such ease, as though cruelty had become muscle memory. Grace didn't answer. She just noted how the dress glittered with an almost surgical brightness, and how much sweeter the image would be once chaos stained it. Evelyn drifted toward her, hand grazing Grace's arm in a motherly gesture that had always felt foreign. "Please, Grace," she whispered urgently, her perfume cloying. "For family honor, don't make a scene tomorrow. This is Amanda's day, not yours." Grace turned her head slowly, her mother's pleading eyes searching hers. Honor. The word rattled inside her like hollow glass. Their version of honor had always been Amanda's pedestal and Grace's silence. She smiled faintly, but it carried no promise. Meanwhile, across the gilded hall, the Kane family gathered in their private lounge. Daniel raised a glass of champagne, his grin sharp, his tuxedo perfectly fitted to his arrogance. "Tomorrow," he said, voice rich with smug confidence, "we don't just celebrate a wedding. We remind every rival in this city that the Kanes are untouchable." Richard reclined in a leather chair, older but heavier with menace. His eyes flicked toward his son, approving but calculating. "Pride has a way of softening the blade, Daniel. Never assume untouchable means immortal." Daniel laughed, careless. "Who dare? Investigators? Journalists? They can't touch us. The Millers begged for this union. My wife's family is proof enough. No one will see tomorrow as anything but glory." They toasted, glasses colliding in a soft chime that echoed like the ringing of steel. From her vantage point in the bridal suite, Grace adjusted the tiny earpiece snug against her ear, its wire hidden beneath her hair. The faint hum of surveillance filtered through, Jason's voice muted, Hayes's presence unspoken but felt. Every toast, every laugh from the lounge downstairs rippled into her recorder. Her gaze returned to Amanda smiling at her own reflection, rehearsing the role of queen. Grace's fingers curled against the sill. The storm outside had grown teeth, rain clawing against the glass as though warning of what was to come. In the lounge below, Richard lifted his glass higher. Tomorrow, New York will witness the strength of the Kane dynasty. The words carried upward, a proclamation that rattled through the hotel walls. And then, barely audible, Daniel leaned close to his father, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The shipment leaves at dawn, disguised as part of the wedding cargo. By the time the vows are said, the arms deal will already be moving. Grace froze, every nerve sharp. Her earpiece hummed, capturing every syllable, the recorder catching Daniel's first whispered confirmation of the arms deal. On the eve of destruction, only one person knelt in silence, and it wasn't the bride. The cavernous interior of St. Patrick's Cathedral swallowed sound, its vaulted arches stretching upward like hands locked in supplication. Candles flickered along the side chapel, their flames quivering each time the heavy doors groaned against the November wind. Grace had slipped inside without drawing attention, the weight of her coat heavy on her shoulders, though it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. She knelt on the worn cushion, the chill of the marble floor biting through her knees. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the polished brass of the altar rail, eyes hollow, lips pressed thin, posture taut as if bracing against more than prayer. For a long moment she just listened. The creak of the wood, the faint hum of traffic outside, the muted thunder of her own heartbeat. Her mind drifted backward, unbidden, to another chapel, another time. 17 years old, invisible in the corner of a high school auditorium, watching Amanda crowned with accolades while her parents beam. Grace had knelt then, too, backstage, clutching the edge of a program booklet as if it could anchor her against the ocean of applause. She hadn't prayed for recognition, only for the ache of neglect to stop hollowing her out. No one noticed. No one ever did. The scrape of footsteps pulled her from the memory. An elderly priest, stooped but steady, passed through the rows of pews. His cassock whispered against the stone as he paused near her. His voice, when it came, was a low rasp softened by years of hearing confessions. "Are you seeking revenge or justice, my child?" Grace's head turned slightly, eyes catching the glow of candlelight. The question hung in the air like incense, invasive yet strangely comforting. Her throat tightened, but she forced the words past it, steady as a blade unsheathed. "If it were revenge, I'd have quit long ago." The priest studied her, but asked nothing more. He nodded once, as if acknowledging that some burdens weren't his to lift, then drifted toward the sacristy, leaving her in silence again. Her hands, folded tightly, trembled. She wasn't sure when the tear came, whether it slid from the weight of memory or the sharpness of what tomorrow demanded. But it cut down her cheek quietly, without spectacle. Grace wiped it away quickly, almost angrily, as though vulnerability were a luxury she couldn't afford. Still, in that moment, it existed. A fissure in the steel mask she had worn since childhood. The cathedral's silence pressed closer, wrapping around her as though to hold the weight she could not share with anyone else. She exhaled a long, controlled breath, then rose, smoothing her coat as though the motion could iron out the storm raging beneath her ribs. At that precise moment, her encrypted phone vibrated in her pocket, a faint pulse against her thigh. She pulled it out, the screen glowing blue in the half-light of the chapel. One message. One final order. Echo 7. Final activation approved. Tomorrow, 8 o'clock. The glow illuminated her face, sharpening the tear tracks still lingering on her skin. Grace stared at the words, her pulse matching the vibration that had already ceased. Tomorrow, the silence of her life would end, not with prayer, but with the storm she had prepared to unleash. Beneath the crystal chandeliers, Amanda spun in triumph while Grace stood still, invisible yet unshakable. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel shimmered like a dream sculpted out of glass and vanity. Hundreds of guests filled the space, sequins and tuxedos glimmering under the light. Champagne cascaded from a crystal tower at the far end, waiters gliding between tables like chess pieces on a board already stacked in Amanda's favor. Laughter rang out in crescendos, a soundtrack to the spectacle of power being flaunted as marriage. Amanda twirled in Daniel Kane's arms, her gown a halo of white silk and diamonds, the veil catching light with each turn. The crowd clapped in rhythm, dazzled. Grace lingered near the edge of the floor, a black dress hugging her frame, deliberate in its simplicity. She did not belong to the shimmer, she belonged to the shadow. That invisibility was her shield. Her eyes swept across the guests, senators, magnates, old money cliques leaning toward the canes as if proximity itself promised fortune. Every face radiated adoration for Amanda, the favored daughter. It was the family dinner all over again, but magnified into a ballroom where the stage lights spared no corner. When the music swelled, Amanda and Daniel drifted toward her. Amanda's smile was weaponized, sharpened into mockery. "See?" she breathed, voice carrying just enough to be overheard. "This is what success looks like." The words dug into the scar of every slight at every dinner table where Grace had been ignored. But Grace's face remained unreadable. She let the venom slide past the surface, recording every inflection of Amanda's tone, cataloging every gesture of arrogance. Daniel's smirk matched his bride's cruelty. His arm locked possessively around Amanda's waist, as if she were not a wife but a trophy acquired, paraded. His eyes scanned the room not for joy, but for recognition of his dominance. He leaned closer to Amanda, whispering something that made her giggle, a sound that stung of superiority. Grace's pulse stayed steady. She had prepared for this moment not with tears but with calculation. Each step Amanda flaunted on that dance floor became another stitch in the tapestry Grace would unravel. The music surged. Applause erupted. Amanda leaned close enough for only Grace to hear. "Don't embarrass yourself tonight. Try not to look so lost." Grace's lips curved in the faintest shadow of a smile, but her voice, when it came, was a blade cloaked in velvet. "Every success demands its price." Amanda froze for half a beat, eyes narrowing, but the crowd's applause swallowed the pause. Daniel twirled her again, dragging her away before the words could lodge fully in her chest. Grace exhaled through her nose, subtle, adjusting the small earpiece hidden beneath her hair. The static cleared into a crisp whisper of sound. Daniel's voice, low and guttural in Russian. "The shipment clears at midnight." Her spine straightened. The words were the trigger, the keystone she had waited for. As Amanda spun in the glow of chandeliers and cameras, Grace's world sharpened into lines of strategy. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a battlefield where every move would decide who walked away crowned and who fell beneath the weight of their own arrogance. With a casual touch to her hair, Grace made the quietest call that would shake empires. The chandeliers burned above like frozen suns, pouring light over Amanda and Daniel as they glided across the floor, flawless in their masquerade. Guests cheered, glasses clinked, cameras flashed, an empire cementing itself in silk and crystal. To anyone watching, Grace was just a silent shadow by the edge of the ballroom, an afterthought in black satin, forgotten as always. But the truth was coiled tight inside her fingertips, in the deliberate way she brushed back a strand of hair, in the signal coded into that single motion. Her earpiece crackled. Jason's voice was hushed, yet sharpened with adrenaline. "That's it, we have them. The shipment confirmation, timestamp exact. They've tied the noose themselves." She let the noise of the crowd blur, heart pounding not with nerves, but with precision. Amanda's laughter rang like brittle glass, clinking against the arrogance in Daniel's smirk. Richard Kane hovered near the bar, exuding menace even in a tailored tuxedo, as if he believed the world bent itself beneath his empire. They all thought this night belonged to them. Grace lowered her hand, every muscle still, every breath measured. The weight of decades, every insult, every dismissal, every scar of invisibility gathered in her throat. She leaned forward slightly, lips barely parting. One word whispered, yet heavy enough to fracture dynasties. "Nightingale." For a moment, nothing shifted. Music swelled, guests twirled, Amanda's veil shimmered under a dozen lenses, and then half a world away, the red light blinked. In an Interpol command center across the Atlantic, keyboards clattered, encrypted lines opened, tactical teams confirmed locations. Director Hayes' gravelly voice pressed into her ear. "Confirmed. Executing. Stand by." Grace's chest rose once, steady, as she kept her gaze fixed on Amanda, twirling like royalty. The bride thought the room belonged to her. But beneath the surface, orders cascaded, bank accounts frozen, servers seized, flights grounded. The Trojan bride plan unfurled exactly as Grace had drawn it, lace and champagne masking snares of steel. Jason's voice again, ragged this time. "Ballroom entry, 10 seconds." Grace's hand tightened around her clutch, calm anchoring every nerve. She counted the beats of the music, each drum roll aligning with her pulse. She thought of the years Amanda had mocked her, the dinners where she'd been invisible, the parents who had bartered away dignity for debts. Tonight, invisibility was her greatest disguise. Then the world cracked open. The ballroom doors slammed against gilded walls, exploding inward with the force of a cannon shot. Armed agents in dark tactical uniforms stormed the space, voices commanding, weapons drawn but precise. The music collapsed into chaos, the band cutting off mid-note, strings screeching into silence. Gasps ripped through the guests, heels scraping marble as panic surged. Crystal glasses tumbled, champagne spilling across polished floors. Amanda's laughter died instantly, her face freezing in incomprehension. She stumbled, her hand releasing the delicate flute she'd been holding. The champagne glass shattered, a brittle scream against the marble. Amanda's mouth parted, eyes wide with horror, as the empire she thought she was marrying into crumbled in front of her. The music died, and with it, Amanda's perfect fairy tale collapsed into rubble. The chandeliers still glimmered, but their glow now revealed only terror. Guests pressed against walls, gowns tangled in panicked retreat, tuxedos jostling for the exits. Sirens bled into the night from outside, red and blue strobing through the tall windows like judgment itself. The Plaza Ballroom, once a cathedral of opulence, had turned into a courtroom without mercy. Daniel Kane was the first to falter. Interpol agents surged through the crowd, their movements sharp, rehearsed, undeniable. Two men seized his arms, forcing him to the polished floor. He twisted violently, shouting profanities, but the click of the handcuffs silenced him more effectively than any argument. His eyes, wild and furious, sought me out across the chaos. The hatred burned there was molten, personal. He wanted me to see it, and I did. I met it without flinching. Richard Kane didn't fight. He stood tall by the shattered remains of a champagne tower, face carved from stone. A man who had built his empire on intimidation now had nothing left to wield. His gaze cut briefly toward Daniel, then to the guests who recoiled as though contagion clung to his tailored suit. He didn't lift a hand, didn't waste a word. The resignation in his stance was heavier than any curse. But Amanda unraveled. Her shriek pierced the air, high and jagged. She clutched her gown as if the lace could shield her from truth, from disgrace, from me. "What does she have to do with this?" she screamed, pointing at me as though I were the intruder, the interloper in her fairy tale. Her voice cracked on the word nobody. "She's nobody. She's nothing." An Interpol commander, dark uniform immaculate despite the pandemonium, cut across her words. His tone was formal, unyielding. "Echo 7, he said. Eyes on me, voice loud enough for the nearest guests to hear. "Package secured. Operation successful. The room stilled just for a breath. My cover name spoken with respect, with authority shattered years of being dismissed as background noise." Amanda's face drained of color. For the first time in her life, she realized I had a name beyond the family shadow. Her knees buckled. The skirt of her gown collapsed around her in layers of ruined white, pooling on the marble like ashes after fire. Mascara streaked her cheeks as sobs wrenched from her chest. She clawed at Daniel's sleeve, but he was pinned, steel cutting into his wrists. She turned to Richard, but he gave her nothing, only silence carved deep as a grave. My parents stood frozen. Thomas's lips trembled, his eyes wide with disbelief that his bargain with the Kanes had not saved him, but destroyed the illusion of control. Evelyn reached for me across the divide of overturned chairs and broken crystal. Her face was painted with pleading, with desperation loved too late, loyalty that had never truly been mine. I held her gaze for a single beat. Then I turned away. The ballroom roared again, the sound of empires breaking under the weight of justice, and for the first time in my life I did not shrink, I did not fade. I walked forward as Amanda sobbed into her gown of ashes, and the world finally saw who I was. On the velvet benches outside the ballroom, the Miller family looked smaller than ever, hollowed by their own choices. The echo of chaos still pulsed through the corridors of the plaza, a ghost of shattered glass and fractured laughter. Now the hall beyond the sealed doors belonged to uniformed officers, to Interpol agents corralling guests and collecting statements. What remained here, in the quiet holding area draped with velvet and brass, was the wreckage of a family that had mistaken privilege for power. Thomas hunched forward, his hands gripping his knees so tightly his knuckles had gone bloodless. Sweat clung to his temples despite the air-conditioned chill. When he looked at me, it was as though the mask he'd worn for decades of stern patriarch, of businessman in control, had dissolved. Grace, he rasped, his voice cracked and low. Fix this. You've always been clever. You can fix this. Beside him, Evelyn clutched her pearls as though the string might tether her to reality. Her eyes brimmed with tears, not of grief for the truth revealed, but of shame that it had been revealed at all. She leaned toward me, imploring. She's still your sister. You can't let it end like this. Please, Grace, think of family honor. Family honor. The phrase tasted like rust on my tongue. I thought of years spent invisible at their table, of Amanda crowned queen while I was reduced to a footnote. I thought of contracts signed in secret, of debts willingly tied to predators. I thought of a white dress swirling in triumph over my silence. My voice, when it came, was steady as stone. I didn't ruin her life. She chose this. And you let her. Amanda sat apart, still in her shredded gown, eyes swollen from tears but blazing with venom. She lurched toward me, shackled by the presence of guards but not silenced. Jealousy, she spat, her voice hoarse, yet sharp. That's all this ever was. You couldn't stand that someone finally loved me, finally gave me what you could never have. Her words cracked with hysteria, but the accusation was familiar, an echo of every dismissal I'd ever endured. I did not flinch. Jason stood at my shoulder, saying nothing, offering only the quiet presence of someone who had chosen to stand beside me when the world tilted. His silence was louder than Amanda's screams, steadier than my parents' pleading. I leaned closer, not to whisper, but to cut. I never wanted to destroy you, Amanda, I said, my voice carrying in the cavernous space. I just couldn't let you drag the world down with you. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of television screens lining the wall. Each flickered with the same images: agents swarming the ballroom, Daniel Kane dragged in cuffs, Richard's frozen stare, Amanda collapsing in disgrace. Beneath the footage, the headline scrolled bold and merciless: Interpol dismantles Kane Empire. I let the words hang there, not as a triumph, but as truth. The empire was gone. The veil was lifted, and the family that had once dismissed me now sat shrunken, stripped of illusion, staring at a daughter they had never truly seen. 6 months later, the world map glowed red, each dot a collapsed empire, each one traced back to Grace's silent call. The chamber at Interpol HQ in The Hague was hushed but alive with light. Digital screens stretched from floor to ceiling, a constellation of seized assets blinking across continents. Bank accounts frozen in Zurich, shell corporations gutted in Singapore, real estate confiscated in Miami. Each one pulsed in rhythm like the aftermath of detonations, but these explosions had left no rubble, only absence where corruption once thrived. I stood in the center of the room, no longer in the shadows, no longer the invisible daughter. Around me, a dozen analysts typed, their chatter crisp, efficient, deferential. They looked to me for direction the way, once upon a time, my own family never had. Jason stood at the far console, sending updates to field teams, while Hayes leaned near the map with his usual stoic stance. He turned to me, the faintest trace of pride breaking his granite expression. You didn't just catch criminals, you dismantled an empire. The words landed heavier than praise, like a verdict long overdue. I nodded, keeping my composure, though the air felt charged in my chest. This was what the years of silence had built toward. Not applause at a family dinner, not affection from parents who couldn't see me, but a reckoning that stretched across borders. I walked among the workstations, pausing at each desk, offering measured instructions. Cross-check this seizure with the Lisbon branch. I told one analyst, flag the Monaco accounts for judiciary review. I told another. My voice carried easily, calm but unyielding. Leadership did not require volume, it required clarity. They responded instantly, their respect not spoken but lived in the rhythm of obedience. Jason drifted closer, handing me a tablet. His tone was dry but softened. Another one's down. Malta. Offshore trust. You're closing circles faster than they can run. I allowed myself a brief smile. That's the point. They can run, but the world doesn't forget. The console at my station pinged, softer than the storm around me. An incoming message, not from a bank, nor from an embassy, but from Amanda. I stared at the sender's name, frozen for a breath. I opened it. The words spilled like broken glass, shards of apology jagged with blame. I never wanted it this way. You humiliated me. You think you're better. I was forced. I hate you. I miss you. It went on, circles of anger and grief, sentences without direction, contradictions tangled in guilt. I read silently, my face a mask. Jason glanced over, catching the shift in my eyes. But I gave him nothing. My fingers hovered above the reply key, the weight of years pressing on a single choice. For a moment, I thought of that empty chair at family dinners, of the veil of mockery in a bridal boutique, of parents who begged for silence while debt swallowed their pride. I thought of Amanda twirling beneath chandeliers, laughing at my invisibility. And then I thought of this room, filled with agents who followed my command, of a map that bore proof of what silence weaponized could do. I pressed delete. No reply, no explanation, no indulgence. The message dissolved into nothing, and with it, the last hold Amanda had over me. I turned back to the glowing map, my reflection fractured across oceans of red light. My voice, quiet but absolute, carried into the room. This is my family now. No one questioned the whisper. They didn't need to. The empire was gone. The world was cleaner, and I at last was no longer invisible. Beneath the glitter of a fallen empire, the silence of truth rang louder than every lie once shouted in power. Justice had not come swiftly, but it had arrived with unshakable weight, proving that betrayal cannot bury integrity forever. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict echoes beyond one lifetime, teaching that no dynasty of deceit can outlast the patience of truth. Sometimes, a single act of resolve is enough to turn the course of a life once shackled by silence. If this story resonates with you, please like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts. Type 1 if you felt the same fire of justice, or 2 if you think the tale still left something missing.